Cookie, and welcome back to another episode of the Untold Origins, the series where I talk about the backstories of one or multiple minor characters from my series Legends. In today's episode, I'll be talking about Dawn and Bronze, who you may remember from previous episodes. Before I get into their backstory, I have something I would like to say. While recording this time-lapse, somehow I completely forgot to draw in Dawn and Bronze's wings. I also make several other mistakes, all of which will be magically fixed by the end of the video. Anyway, let's get started. Both born in Wolverina, Dawn and Bronze grew up together as best friends. They met each other in preschool and were practically inseparable ever since. They did everything together, from playing at the park to sneaking out from class. When they got older, they practiced using their magic. Dawn had light magic, while Bronze had dark and lightning magic. His magic was quite unique, since his power aligned with positive energy. Yet one of the elements he wielded was dark magic. This kind of pairing is rare amongst fairies. Yet somehow, Bronze became best friends with a descendant of such a rare fairy. Dawn's great-grandfather, Nor, wielded light magic, but was aligned with negative energy. He also was the previous guardian of the Beacon of Light before his successor, Sunbeam, took over. Due to this, and the fact that Sunbeam became good friends with Nor's daughter, Dawn grew up with a fascination about the Beacon of Light. She even got to meet Sunbeam on several occasions. So very early on in her life, Dawn set her sights on becoming a guardian. And of course, Bronze did too. When I grow up, I'll become a guardian just like Nor. Or at least, I'll try to. What about you? I'll be right by your side. I'll prove my worth so much that the Beacon will have no choice but to choose two guardians. Eventually, when they came of age, Dawn and Bronze applied to become guardians and were accepted as apprentices. They would trade alongside a few other fairies to see who was best suited as guardians. It didn't take long for everyone to figure out that Dawn and Sunbeam were familiar with each other, which caused a lot of concern about favoritism, but Sunbeam shot them down and assured them that everyone will be treated fairly. Still, this created a rift between Dawn and the rest of the apprentices. She didn't mind though, since Bronze is still by her side. Though, unbeknownst to her, even he was a little skeptical, but he knew that it would be unwise to ostracize Dawn. In fact, he figured staying by her side would give him the best advantage over the apprentices, so he let them sabotage themselves. Dawn and Bronze practiced sparring each other every day with their new weapons, a staff and a curved sword respectively. Though they were both very skilled, it was clear that Bronze was better at combat. This made him a little overconfident that he would be the next guardian, to which Sunbeam explained that being a guardian was more complex. Tell me something. If being a guardian was all about being the best fighter, why don't the royals just send their guards to protect the beacon? They have plenty to spare, and some are already stationed here. I will. Because being a guardian is more than just being the beacon's protector. We are its caregivers and are responsible for communicating with the spirits residing in it and sharing their messages. Though Bronze was a skilled fighter, Dawn had him beat in terms of knowledge and spirituality. She easily connected to the beacon and knew how to perform every task with ease. Which ranged from meditations to rituals. Bronze, however, practically had no connection. Out of all the apprentices, he was by far the worst in this aspect. Dawn did everything she could to help him, and though progress was slow, she congratulated him for every small achievement and remained encouraging the entire time. However, the more she helped Bronze, the angrier he became. He didn't want to be seen as weak, depended on someone else to do the right things. He tried to stay quiet about his feelings, but over time, he started lashing out at Dawn, though he made sure to always apologize so they weren't on bad terms. After all, he knew Dawn was still a key part in his plan to become a guardian. Hey, let me help. No, I don't need any help, especially from you. Whoa, calm down. I'm sorry, but you won't be able to do this if you're angry. You're right. I'm sorry. Though Dawn was patient with Bronze, she hated this new side of him. Still, for the sake of their friendship, she kept her concerns quiet. Sunbeam, meanwhile, kept a close eye on him. She noticed the growing darkness inside of him, how if he kept going down this path of violence, he would ruin his own life. She talked to him on several occasions, warning him to better his attitude or he'll never become a guardian. Though by that point, she knew Bronze lost his chance, but she still kept him as an apprentice so as to not arouse any suspicion. Towards the end of their training, Bronze had completely stopped listening to Dawn's advice and solely focused on fight training. Even after everything, he believed that the beacon would select both him and Dawn as guardians. If that was the case, He saw no point in trying to connect to the beacon since his best friend would be doing that. Dawn, meanwhile, became more anxious around him. He had become so violent and snappy at everyone that she felt she had to walk around eggshells any time they were together. She started wearing a mask around him, pretending that everything he did was correct as to not provoke any outbursts. And the more he talked about his excitement of the two of them becoming guardians, the more she dreaded it. The once close friendship they had slowly became one-sided. Still, Dawn held on to hope that the old bronze was still there. Eventually, it became time for all the apprentices to find an offering to get to the beacon. Since this was an independent task, Dawn and Bronze were for once separated, much to Dawn's delight and Bronze's dismay. When they returned, Dawn had found a beautiful iris that she infused with light magic, while Bronze found a bright moonstone. They and the rest of the apprentices gave their offering to the beacon and waited for his decision. Eventually, a single orb of light was released, which hovered at each apprentice before flying into Dawn's chest, meaning that she, and she alone, was the now guardian. By that point, Dawn had earned the respect of the other apprentices, and they, along with Sunbeam, congratulated her. Bronze, however, was furious, though thankfully, he remained neutral until they were dismissed. A proper ceremony for Dawn will be held the next day, in which all the apprentices were expected to attend. However, Dawn wasn't quite sure if Bronze would actually come. So she tracked him down to confront him, and he finally released his fury. He argued that he should have been the guardian, that he was the most worthy. He even tried to argue that the reason Dawn was chosen over him was purely based on the fact that her great-grandfather was the guardian and her personal connection to Sunbeam. Dawn was taken aback by this, but instead of calling out Bronze's faults, she tried to appeal to him and reach a compromise. It's not fair. At least we could have been guardians together. I know, but hey, I have an idea. Why don't you apply yourself to be a royal guard? With your skills, you'll do great. And I can pull some strings so you can be stationed at the beacon. I guess that's not a bad idea. Despite Dawn's suggestion, Bronze was not happy. But he didn't let Dawn know that. Instead, he made his own plan, one that would guarantee his place as a guardian. On the day of the ceremony, the apprentices stood around the beacon, with Bronze standing the closest to Dawn. Sunbeam said a few words before taking her place next to him. Then, as part of the ceremony, Dawn meditated to communicate to the spirits of the beacon. There are two of them, a human named Angel and a wolf named Mary, who were the original guardians. This part of the ceremony is meant to formally create a bond between the guardian and the spirits. However, just when Dawn was about to finish, Angel sent a warning for her to wake up. She did just as she was told and noticed Bronze swiftly coming at her with his sword. Dawn barely managed to avoid what would have been a fatal blow, but the sword still managed to cut her face, blinding one of her eyes. Sunbeam and a few apprentices quickly immobilized Bronze, while others rushed to help Dawn. As they checked out her wound, she kept her focus on her former friend. Bronze, what have you done? Bronze was taken into custody. Because the act of attacking a guardian is considered a kingdom-level threat, the royals ended up getting involved. The king wanted to execute him to prevent him from doing anything like that again, but Dawn begged him not to. Even after everything, she didn't want to see Bronze get killed. Some wanted to imprison him, but in the end, they decided that the further away Bronze was from the beacon, the better. So he was banished from the kingdom with the condition that if he ever set a foot back on Wolverina's territory, he would be killed. After Bronze was banished and Dawn recovered from her injury, the ceremony was redone and Dawn assumed her position as guardian. Over time, Dawn grew to accept what happened and realized that she was much happier without Bronze. She also realized that had she called out Bronze for his behavior and made him realize that what he was doing was wrong, things could have ended on better terms. Bronze, however, never let go of what happened. He let his anger, jealousy, and hatred consume him. And so, he plotted to take revenge, especially against Dawn and the beacon itself. As time passed, he even grew a following of people who also hated the kingdom but weren't banished, meaning they can bring Bronze information. Though it would take a few years to enact his plan, he patiently waited for his opportunity, which came when a new group of apprentices arrived at the Beacon of Light. And that's all I have for this video. If you want to know how Dawn and Bronze's story wraps up, feel free to check out episode 7 of the series. Anyway, make sure to comment below what you thought of their backstory. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye!